That hardware was very complex and required an understanding which we did not have at that time, but the alien groups gave us. The intelligence groups also were in on this, and the, shall we say, the particular corporation which coordinated all of the hardware building and the requirements technically from both the alien and the human side was ITT Corporation, which, because a result of all of this, was broken up. But that came much later. But they were high in the saddle at that time, you might say, and they were the principal coordinator, helped get the contracts shipped around to various companies in the United States. There was Westinghouse involved in it, if I recall correctly, RCA, a couple of computer corporations are involved. All of the contracts for the various pieces and hardwares and systems were handled through ITT Corporation as the principal coordinator. There's an interesting thing about ITT, which we learned later on, was that it was a wholly owned subsidiary, if you will, of a German group, the Krupps. The Krupps owned 53% of the stock of ITT at one time, at least during this period of time. Therefore, you can say the whole thing went full circle. The Germans started it in a sense, and the Germans were operating it in another sense in terms of the financing. And this went on so that during the period from 68 to 76, they were building the hardware to create the time tunnel, or the Montauk Tunnel as we came to call it. A great deal of hardware had to be designed and built on station, off station, moved in, and of course expand the operations. The major operations were underground, not on the surface, though some of it was still used on the surface. And the principal time tunnel that was developed, phase 2 of it, was underground. Phase 1 was actually above ground and used the old radar tower. The original phasing of the system required the use of an RF system, very high powered, and the whole radar tower and all of the equipment above ground fell into this very naturally and was modified in order to be able to do this. Needless to say, they had a lot of failures and a lot of problems. Of course, some of the hardware didn't work and some of the approaches weren't exactly right, and they had to use computers that we had available, which were, of course, at that time period, the IBM 360s and the 370s, and later on, after 76, of course, the Cray 1. But in using the IBM's computers, we had a great problem. We wanted to interface with alien computers which were brought in to Montauk in order to provide the data backup and the data manipulation, and to be able to handle the whole system because it was extremely complex and the mathematics involved was incredibly complex. I don't know if anybody other than the aliens fully understood the mathematics. Those in the technical staff that could handle the math and build the hardware, our computers could not handle it, so they ran into a problem where they had to convert a lot of their data into a format which the IBM computers could accept. Later on, there was some help from the Cray 1, and of course, as anyone knows today, the Cray Corporation is up to Cray 6 or Cray 7. If we had had a Cray 7 available then, there would have absolutely no problem interfacing with the alien computers. Probably a Cray 5 could have done it, but that didn't exist. We tried it. It didn't work. So the aliens had to provide IBM data cards and other forms of translation of their mathematics into a format which would fit and work in our computers, and that took almost 10 years. It took from 68 until 76, and actually a little further into that period, into 77. But eventually they got it to work. It's the original one, as they had it, which was using the radar tower as the element for focusing the energy in order to produce the tunnel effect, the time tunnel or the time transfer from point A to wherever. And I might add, for the basis of those who don't understand it, well, did they have a receiver at the other end? No, they did not. It was a very interesting and unique system, and this is why the aliens designed it this way, and why apparently they knew how to do it, and we didn't. We would have thought about, we got to have a transmitter here and a receiver there, which says you got to have a receiver at every point where you want to go. It wasn't necessary with this system. The tunnel became the transceiver, if you will. You go in at one end, all of the equipment is at one end, and it focuses the energy on down to whatever point you choose to have it go to, and the product, or I should say the transfer, of whether it's hardware, material, personnel, or both, will go through this tunnel and materialize out at the other end, not actually dematerializing in the tunnel, but going through what you would call an extended artificial wormhole, and would come out at the other end, wherever they wanted it. And the reverse would take place if you wanted that person, group, or hardware to come back. You reverse the phase of the thing, so it would pick them up from that end and bring them back to Montauk. First working system that was tested, in my recollection, was right around 76. It might have been slightly earlier, but 76 was the point where they were doing their first experimental work. Now, I might add, prior to that, there was another aspect of this, which was sort of overlapping and, of course, was in a partial sense independent. And that was the use of the Montauk chair and the psychics to see whether or not, through the computer systems and understanding of reality, you could make a thought reality. In other words, have somebody sitting in the chair think of an object, and could you create this through the computer system and the understanding of reality as the aliens gave it to us and we can put it into our computers? Could you take a thought and make a physical object out of it? They did. They were able to do this quite well. At first, when you shut the transmitter off, the thing disappeared. It was a non-permanent thing. They finally determined how, and they were able to make a permanent object. The chair would have coils wound into it for picking up the body energies, and the early system used a form of antenna very much like a delta T antenna. Basically, it was to pick up XYZ coordinate energies from the person's head, because the human head does radiate energy, both electric field and magnetic. And you had to pick these up with very sensitive amplifiers. Then they finally shifted to something which was picking up certain specific bands at RF. These energies, which were very low level, but nevertheless there, were amplified, and they went through their own processing system, and eventually they were fed into the computers. The person has to think, if you pardon the expression, in computerese. They have to think in a form which the computer recognizes. Now, this required additional training. All of those sensitives, all of those chair psychics, if I may call them that, had to go through a very special training process in another location down off the shores of the Potomac, which we call the Potomac Facility. It's still in operation today, as far as I know. But it was there at the time when we needed it. And what it did, it took people in, put them through special computer training systems, high-speed training, plus capabilities of exciting and improving the thinking capacity of the brain, which required certain chemicals being injected into their systems, and going through literally 5 phases of this kind of training. If anyone has seen the movie The Lawnmower Man, that is exactly the kind of facility I'm talking about, because that was based on the actual facilities of the Potomac that we had down there. And I went through it because I had to know exactly what these guys were going to go through. However, they had to do this because what it did, it gave them the ability to understand computer language, whatever form you wanted to use, whether it's COBOL or any of the others. But you see, if they put them in the proper state of reverie, you access their subconscious, plug in a certain program, a series of them in fact. It's mind control of another level. It's mind control where they're not controlling the mind, you're giving the mind new abilities. So that the person can think in the normal form when they're in their normal state of mind, like they're normally conscious and talking like you and I. But if they were to be used for this program, they were put in a special state of mind where they accessed this training in the subconscious, where any thought that they were given, any idea which was presented to them, was converted into a computerese format. As I say, whether it's COBOL or any other program, didn't matter. Whatever the program they wanted to use, it came out of their minds in the subconscious level. This was picked up by the coils, and this was understandable by the computers. They had to think in a computer language. And this was done at a subconscious level, not the normal conscious level. And if they wanted to transport a person somewhere or an object that we put in that traffic circle, the antenna would be fed the appropriate RF signals and so forth, and all of the corrected aspects, and that person or object would be picked up, transported, and go through the tunnel to wherever it went through. This was not too good. It was sloppy, and it wasn't a true tunnel as we used it later. There was a lot of shall we say, improvements of the system as time went on, a lot of modification. In the last 2-3 years, it worked very smoothly. From about 1980 on, it worked very smoothly without any of these kind of problems. Ceiling level was typically about 12 foot, because they might have room for a lot of equipment and cooling and all of this. But some of that equipment generated large amounts of heat. Extended for hundreds of feet. In fact, I would say that the bottom 2 levels extended for over a mile. It was quite extensive. And they merged with natural cavern systems, because under Long Island, as part of even the Montauk operation, there were a lot of natural caverns which sort of faced onto and actually joined into the artificial constructions, actually merged into the natural cavern systems. Extremely successful, probably more successful than they expected in their wildest dreams, because here you had a tool which enabled you to go to the moon and do exploration on the moon, or inside if you knew there was an inside and way to get into space-time tunnel tool, if you will, to explore space and time simultaneously. You could go to Mars, you could go to any of the other planets, you could go to another solar system, you could go across the galaxy.